Welcome, everyone, to Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah, our Rational Torah study this evening with Rabbi Barry Silver and Va-Dor friends, members, and family. And we're here on February 7th tonight, and it's the parasha Exodus Yitro. Take it away, Rabbi.
Thanks so much, Sharon, for setting this up, and thanks everyone for joining us. We have an interesting passage. It's called Yitro, as Sharon mentioned. It's the name of Moses's father-in-law. And what makes it rather interesting is that two things occur. One is that the father-in-law gives advice to Moses and says, all day long you're adjudicating cases. People are coming up to you with their problems. Why don't you divide up your power among others and appoint people to be heads of hundreds and fifties and tens. And by some miracle, Moses actually takes advice from his father-in-law. That's one of the greatest miracles of the Bible, especially considering Moses' high stature. He, according to the Torah, talks to God face to face, and here he is taking advice from his father-in-law who's not even Jewish. It kind of teaches us something that we shouldn't just pass off advice or overlook it, especially depending on the source. If it makes sense, we should do it. And so Moses decided to go along and he divided up his power. Some people find this to be the beginning of democracy. You could say that, but really it's just that Moses did it not to share power. He was still the ultimate authority, but in order to make his life a little easier. The other thing about this passage that's quite significant is that for the first time we are confronted with the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments is given here and also in Deuteronomy. Most people think the Ten Commandments has special status because it's the top 10 and it's more significant than other commandments, but according to the Orthodox, even every commandment is of equal value. So you got 613 of them, and they're all considered to be important. There are other parts of the Torah where they have a list of commandments, and you could say that maybe those are the ones that are most central to Judaism. But for historical reasons, these commandments made it to the top 10, and they're enshrined. And many Christians like to put them up in courthouses and in schools and try to get everybody to observe the Ten Commandments. Sadly, they ignore the other 603, and the fundamentalists ignore the 10. They want everyone to follow the 10, but they don't, especially the part that says, Ani Yahweh, and I am Yahweh, and you shall have no other gods before me. Then they go around worshiping Jesus as a god. So they want everyone to follow the commandments except for them. And they also have another commandment that you shouldn't have any graven images, which of course most people do. It's so literal that you can't even draw a picture of somebody. They do, but so what's the significance of the Ten Commandments for Jews? For Jews, the Ten Commandments reflects the fact that the Jewish people have always felt that this world needs a moral code, that without morality, the world would be a hellish place to live. And we've also taken upon ourselves to try to help guide and shape that moral code. So that's why we are sometimes called the chosen people, but I think more accurate it is to say that we're the choosing people. We've chosen to try to bring morality to the world. Ten Commandments reflects our first effort, not our last. There's things in it that are very profound, very salutary for any society, but they're not really our best. And I think that if each of us were to sit down and write a list of commandments, I would venture to say, blasphemous as this might be to some, that we could do better. Reason being that these commandments were not written by God, they were written by our ancestors living in the Bronze Age. Compared to where everybody else was at that time, they were very advanced. Compared to where we need to be, There's many things in the Ten Commandments that are very helpful and we still haven't achieved yet. So I don't mean to make light of the Ten Commandments. It represents our first effort to bring morality to the world, and it is the beginning of a very long process of the Jewish people being referred to by some as the conscience of mankind. That is why the Jews have suffered persecution often, because a lot of people don't like to have to listen to their conscience. They'd rather silence their conscience and do what they want. And so consequently, the Jews have been tormented and tortured for a long, long time. And that's probably one of the reasons why. So I will turn this over now. We have an important address tonight with President Biden, who's going to be on later on. So you could say, well, we're just biding our time right now until the State of the Union address. And also can't wait to hear the rebuttal by Huckabee Sanders, a great source of truth and wisdom and enlightenment, who was able to rationalize the irrational and justify the unjustifiable under her former boss. And my brother, who's a comedian, told me that Stormy Daniels is the only person that Trump ever hired who is actually qualified for the job. So I'll leave it at that, and now I'll turn it over to everybody else. Anybody have any comments or questions or better?
Yeah, I love it.
Better humor.
Because Trump's supposed to be giving his speech too.
Well, she's giving it for him. She's the surrogate.
Oh, okay. That should be good.
Yeah. Anybody have any comments?
Yeah,
like
I do. I'm still stuck on, where is Merrick Garland? Why? How can Trump, maybe somebody has some thoughts. How can this man be marching around, announcing his candidacy, speaking, going to speak tonight, which I will not watch, and how can he continue and not have any consequences for his behavior? I just can't understand it. And Sarah Huckabee, I mean, this is a joke. She's a liar. She lied throughout her press briefings. I don't know how many lies. And what is happening here in this country? The other issue I just want to bring up and get your thoughts is the assault rifle pins on the Republican Party. They're all wearing lapel pins, assault rifle pins, which leads me to believe these were all pre-ordered. They knew they were doing this. It's horrific and such a horrible insult and so pathetic and embarrassing for our country. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and maybe somebody else has some other comments.
Well, that's because they're pro-life. So they believe in protecting life.
Right.
Except if you're on the wrong end of one of those assault rifles, then too bad.
Right.
It
Too
is
bad.
quite ironic that the group that considers themselves pro-life is wearing assault rifles. And well, it's almost as ironic as having a religion that celebrates the symbol of a method, a barbaric, brutal method of torture that the Romans inflicted against, it wasn't just against Jesus, but what they don't know historically is tens of thousands of Jews were crucified for standing up for the religion that gave rise to Christianity. And they celebrate this as something wonderful to wear around their neck. This was one of the most hideous, barbaric forms of execution ever devised. It wasn't just used against Jews either. It was used by the Romans against political opponents, and it's barbaric. And it's not something that we should celebrate, nor do I think we should celebrate the day that Jesus was crucified as Good Friday. So there's a lot of irony here. People calling themselves pro-life and running around with assault weapons and not doing anything to help protect the life of our planet by denying climate change. So you're right, the world's in a sad state of affairs, but they say it's always darkest before the dawn. So maybe people will wake up one day and start observing a rational form of religion and politics, and perhaps we can help make that happen. Anybody else?
I agree.
Thanks.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I would like to get your point of view on how one person could turn this country into what it is now.
Yes.
I have never understood how a reality star that had no politics in his life at all, not even being a dog catcher, has come in here and has turned this country upside down. And I am going to watch the State of the Union because I think Joe Biden has done everything he possibly can, even if he is 88 or 100 years old. And what I don't understand, some of these MAGA Trumpers are not even going to be there. And who knows what they're going to do when they are there. Could you please explain to me how Trump took this country over and turned it against everything that we believed in?
Wow.
I can remember 20 years ago, it didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. You got along. You tried to help each other. Now there is no unity because of him.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't agree with the aspersions that are being cast against Joe Biden because he's old. I think it's great that we have a senior citizen who's still active, and I think he's a great example for people to show that just because you're getting older doesn't mean that you are no longer valid, that you're not worth anything, and that you should be put out to pasture. I think that he has done a very good job. I think that his poll numbers are drastically low just because of media bias and people who are prejudiced against people who are older. It's a youth culture, and I think it's a very sad state of affairs. As far as how one person could take this country in the wrong direction, I think that one person was merely the face or the catalyst for a whole bunch of people who felt that way, and he was the one who was able to galvanize that. Unfortunately, clearly, Trump is not the only one who holds his views, and he wasn't able to convince people to do something that they never felt in the first place. They were moving in that direction, and he lit the spark, and then they jumped on board. It's very similar to people say, like in Nazi Germany, how could one person, Hitler, convince all these people to murder all these Jews? Well, they had been set up for it by a religion that casted the Jews as agents and children of the devil, and so the whole continent was very soft and very easily swayed to anti-Semitism, especially the religious countries. And I don't mean to pass the buck onto Christianity. The Jews kind of got this thing started with the irrational concepts of God ordering genocide and choosing people. So, but when you say one person led the country, he did. He was the catalyst, but he portrayed himself as someone who was not a politician. The fact that he had no political experience was to his advantage, because people could not point out any track record, because once you get involved in politics and you actually take office, usually you're not so popular anymore, because it's easy from the outside to criticize and to find all the things that are being done wrong. When you're on the inside and you actually have to run a country, that's different. And so his poll numbers were much, much, much higher when he could just be a flamethrower and criticize and not have to defend what he was doing. But his views, I think, reflect the views of many. I think there's many, many, many people who are very concerned about the direction of this country. some of their concerns are legitimate, most of them are not, but they feel like the country is being overrun by minorities. They feel like people aren't safe in their own home. They feel like there's no more morality because people are moving away from religion.
Yes.
And they feel like there's no more law and order and patriotism. And that's how they perceive the Democratic Party.
Right.
There is some truth to many of these concerns. The Democratic Party is not perfect. The liberals and progressives have made serious errors and serious mistakes. And I think it would be good, instead of just writing off these people as lunatics and ignoring all of their criticisms, most of which I think are invalid, I think it would be a good idea to use this as an opportunity to listen and to see how we can do better instead of just instantly reacting and rejecting. You know, like as a rabbi, I have a definite point of view, and I promote a certain type of Judaism. Many people respond very favorably to it, and some don't. I could easily just say, well, these people are unenlightened. They're not on my wavelength. They don't see things the way I do, and they don't know what they're talking about. Or I could listen and think maybe there's some validity to their comments. Maybe they're not 100% right, but maybe they're 80 or 20 or 30, and we could all do very well by listening to people. We don't get a chance very often to have people critique us, and so we don't get a chance to really learn and grow from others. Most of us don't want to be negatively critiqued, but I think it's very healthy to seek out different opinions, even if they're not favorable, because we could learn a lot more. That's why when I start a speech, I often say, if you agree with me, I want to hear from you. And if you disagree with me, I want to hear from you even more. At Va-Dor, you know, we've launched a new type of approach to Judaism. Many people respond well to it. Many have not. Some of those people are no longer with us. They made accusations that were extremely harsh and, in my opinion, invalid. But many other people have made some critiques and criticisms and said, you know, you're trying this new thing. I think it would be better if you tried it this way, or maybe this might be a better approach. I don't always agree, but I always listen. And many times I do agree, and many times I learn from it. And so as far as Trump is concerned, there are many criticisms of the Democratic Party, one of which I believe, I don't know if it's been put in these terms, but many people look at the Black community as if all of its problems are due to slavery and to white oppression, and all the Blacks are victims, and they have no responsibility. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's a good idea. The Democratic Party kind of buys into that, especially with the Black Lives Matter, where they have started out with anti-Semitism and preaching hatred against police and stirring up violence. And the Democrats say, oh, that's just Blacks. Well, it's not. I mean, we need to thoroughly review what the police are doing, and we need to constantly critique how we're dealing with racism. But it's not all the fault of whites, and it's not the case that all the Blacks are innocent victims. If you have a society where half the people have children out of wedlock, and you have drugs and guns and music that is vile, your culture is not going to do well. And you can't blame all of it on the past. The Jewish people have faced horrible things in the past, but we don't go around blaming everybody and holding a chip on our shoulder. We do what we can to overcome it and to move on. We don't forget. We never want to forget, but we don't want to get bogged down in a morass of self-pity and victimhood. That's my long response to your very short observation.
One last
I agree
thing.
with
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with you, everything you just said. But
Thanks.
I think the issues are so complex that it's so interesting to have discussion with intelligent people. But it's just so complex.
And it doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen often because most people in political parties are too busy defending their party.
Right.
And they're not interested in having rational discourse and saying, yeah, I agree with my party here and here I disagree. Go ahead. Anybody else?
Yes. Would you like to hear from me?
Absolutely. We always want to hear from our president.
I always like to be the conscience of Va-Dor. So how did Trump get to be where he is? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that. But you could come up with a list of things that probably can argue why. I'll give you a couple, but I don't think it's just a couple of reasons. I think one, the candidate on the other side was maybe the worst candidate ever running for the office of president. She happened to be female, and that's a shame because it would have been nice to have the first female president. But she was essentially incompetent as a candidate, as Secretary of State, and so forth. So I think that helped Trump. I think also there was backlash against Obama. I don't think there was a certain group of people, group of people out there, whatever you want to call them, who have no use for Obama, good or bad. When you add that all up on election day, you get Trump. And at first I thought Trump might have some possibilities, but obviously he's got some problems that his mother didn't attend to when he was growing up. So it's too late now. But so that's a short answer to a long question. As far as Biden is concerned, I think I have to disagree with the rabbi, however. I think he's not up to the job. You see it in different ways. This Chinese balloon that was just shot down. Now, I mean, across the country, starting up in Montana, and it would have been easy to shoot it down right then and there. Montana has 5 people living in that state, so waiting till it crosses the country and shooting it down in the ocean, where it's far more difficult to retrieve, I think that was a poor decision. And it seems like that is getting a lot of press in that same way. So, my dear friend Rabbi Silver, I have differences with what you said about Trump, and you know that. And I don't care for him myself, but I don't care for Biden either. I think they both are terrible. They need to go back to New York and Delaware. Get somebody else.
Well, let me respond to that. I don't see how anybody rationally can put Trump and Biden in the same category or bracket them as both bad. There's just no possible way that you could put somebody in the category of an insurrectionist to try to take over the government and end our democracy as a pathological liar and everything else. A self-admitted abuser of women who then deny. I mean, there's no way that you could bracket Biden with that. The balloon issue, I think, is just ballooning into something way out of proportion. And I think the people who are criticizing him are full of hot air. I do agree with you that it would have been a good idea to blast it out of the sky in Montana, and I appreciate your critique and the humor. I think you're right, but I mean, in general terms, that's a relatively minor decision. There's spying going on all over the place on both sides. But if you look overall, and I agree with you, Stanley, if he was 30, 40 years younger, he'd be in better shape. But you say he's not up for the job, and I'm wondering, well, who do you think is? You didn't think much of Hillary. Hillary wasn't my favorite candidate, but she was vilified so much. I mean, they made her into something that was like a witch and an ogre. I think partly because she was a woman. I think that if she was a man, I don't think she would have faced such withering criticism. I think she was a typical politician. got a lot of money from special interests, sold to special interests many times over. But by the time you get into that position of running for president, that's par for the course. So no, she's not my idea of a good politician, but I didn't think she was a terrible candidate. I thought that she was vilified mercilessly. As far as Obama, he wasn't my favorite either, but people hated him. And clearly there was some kind of racist motivation for hating him. If you're going to tell me that Obama wasn't such a good president, he did policies I didn't agree with, okay, I can live with that. I can accept that. You don't agree with his policies. But the vilification of him was way over the top. He's an intelligent guy, a smart guy. His decisions were arrived at rationally, and the animus against him and Hillary, I think, is due to misogyny and racism. I'm not saying that everybody that doesn't like Hillary or Obama are racist or misogynist. Clearly they're not. I didn't care for them too much either, but I'm just saying the level of vitriol and animosity towards them was pretty it far outweighed what they actually did. As far as why the Republicans like Trump, it's very simple. Very, very simple. The Republicans worship money. They worship at the feet of the golden calf. They don't like government because they don't want someone taking their money and giving it to someone else. Now, I know I'll be accused of oversimplification, but to me, the answer is very simple. If he was a regular guy making $30,000 or $40,000, they wouldn't have given a second thought. He was a billionaire, so they figured if you worship money, then he's the guy to run the country because he'll make everybody rich. Okay. He also was a guy who was he's like a professional con artist and charlatan. He's able to fool people and deceive people very easily. And people like his bravado and his braggadocio. A lot of men especially respond to all of that. So he was also the most entertaining of anybody. And today we Americans seek entertainment more than I think rational thinking or knowledge. So he was entertaining. He went after his opponents in funny ways, and I think those people were incompetent. The ones who were in the Republican primary who let Trump just trounce them and walk all over them, I think, and put up with him saying horrible things, I think they were pretty incompetent. So that's some of my reasons why I think Trump was able to do so well. He clearly misrepresented himself. He apparently is not so successful in business as we thought. He reminds me of the joke about how do you make a small fortune in Israel? Said, well, you start out with a large one. So how did Trump make a small fortune? His father set him up, and now we're seeing that he was losing money. So he was the biggest loser, but he was able to fool people and deceive people who wanted to be deceived because he catered to their religious prejudice, the Christian nationalists, and the people who wanted to take over, who believe in force and arms and a lot of bad things. He made all of that acceptable, and that's why I think he's dangerous.
Excuse me, can I say something?
Sure.
Because every time I try to say something, by the time
Go
it gets
ahead,
to me,
Wendy,
the
stop.
conversation has changed. Okay,
Go ahead.
several things. For one thing, with the balloon, he wanted to shoot it down that day, and all the higher ups, all the other people said, no, you can't do it now. It's too dangerous. We have to wait. He wanted to shoot it down that day. Right. Secondly, in terms of Hillary, we know that the Russians interfered in the election. We know that they saw what an idiot Trump was, and that Trump would be much better for them than Hillary. And we know they interfered in the elections, and that related to Trump getting more votes. Plus, the whole Comey thing happened a week before the election because the election was so close. And if the Comey thing hadn't happened, she wouldn't have lost a lot of votes because we all were shocked when she did not win. So those are three major reasons. So this whole thing you're saying, country, and you may feel a certain way, and the rabbi may feel a certain way, and did it happen because of this, that, and the other thing? I mean, the thing with the Russian and Comey were major because she did not lose by that many votes. I mean, Trump didn't think he was going to win. And you remember the newscasters, every time Hillary lost a state, they were like, well, it's just this state or that state. I remember watching on NBC, and they were absolutely floored as more and more states kept coming in for Trump. Everybody was shocked. So
Wendy,
again,
I couldn't agree with you more. You made 3 excellent points. Those all occurred to me, but I didn't want to talk too long. But all of those points that you made, I agree with wholeheartedly, and I appreciate your pointing them out to us.
See, the thing too is that
I don't think they should be blown off.
The Republican Party is not the same Republican Party of Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, and as John Boehner said, former Speaker of the House under Obama, said that the Republican Party was hijacked, and it was hijacked by Trump. And it's easier to give up one's responsibility to be an educated voter and just pass off their vote to that's what they done, and that's how he got in.
Agreed. Yeah,
once he got in, you know, none of those people want to lose their office. So once, you know, he was the one that people wanted, if they didn't keep backing him, you know, they didn't want to lose their voters in whatever state, you know, it was. They were all, you know, many of them were doing it for political reasons.
Right. It was total political cowardice. His opponents said harsh, vile things about Trump and what would happen to the party and the country if he ever got elected. And their predictions were true, but they wanted to hold office more than they wanted to do the right thing. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, I guess Sharon's disappointed because she always likes to have a lively discussion about the Torah passage and then deal with current events. But I think because of the State of the Union speech, current events kind of dominated the picture. But let's just summarize as far as the Torah reading. I don't want to give a short shrift, and we'll be reading it this Shabbat. But as far as the Torah reading is concerned, we should remember that the Sedra that contains the 10 Commandments is named after a non-Jew, which the rabbis have interpreted to mean that morality is a gift from the Jews to the non-Jews. It's not just morality for us, that we have an obligation to be the light to the nations. And so it's appropriate that this passage with the 10 Commandments is named after somebody who's not Jewish. It's an important lesson to learn that we shouldn't try to seize as much power for ourselves as we can, but we should try to share it. And it's important to remember that we have, as Jews, have promoted a moral code. And fortunately, it's been evolving and becoming more and more advanced as we go, and we should continue that process. If I was going to write a moral code, or if you were, it would probably be a bit different. But one of the things that I would include is that children should not be brainwashed and indoctrinated into irrational religions, which deny science and create barriers between themselves and others, and shut down critical, rational thinking. Children should not be subjected to that. That's a form of child abuse. And I think that we should encourage children to be able to be free thinkers and everybody else. I want to thank everybody for listening and participating. And I know you're all looking forward to seeing some interesting politics on TV tonight. Thank you, everyone.